Ready
Excellent.
to go.
And we're live with the SP Spaz, Jeff,
Hey,
and we're going to be talking about one of his favourite episodes.
yes, it's was actually aired as the second season premiere of Homicide, but in production order, it's actually the fourth and final episode of the second season, and it's called "BOP GUN," which is actually the title of a song by the funk group Parliament Funkadelic, and several of the things in this episode contain references to stuff from Parliament Funkadelic. You'll notice some things with the people who were in the music department for Homicide would get to insert things in the script from time to time that would reference musical artists. So if you know have been paying attention so far and if you watched the episodes, we had a suspect named Lane Staley, who was the lead singer of Alice in Chains, and then we had an episode that featured a character that was interviewed also as a suspect, whose name was Chris Novoselic, who some of you may remember was a guitarist for the band Nirvana. And then in this episode, we had some references to Parliament Funkadelic, including the character of Marvin, whose street name was Kid Funkadelic. And of course, the title of the episode was Bop Gun, and then there was a couple other things that referenced stuff from then. I'm not sure if Tweety was one of those, but anyway. So the summary of the episode: Felton and Howard investigate the murder of Iowa woman Catherine Ellison, who was shot to death in front of her husband Robert and two young children during a stick-up. Since the victims are tourists, the case becomes a red ball and receives considerable attention from the press, city officials, and top police brass. Although we didn't actually see Barnfather and Granger in this episode. Bayless tries to interview the two young children, but Ellison stops him, protesting the experience is too hard on them. After obtaining information from other people on the street, the police arrest Marvin, who possesses .45 caliber bullets matching those used in the shooting. A mournful Ellison overhears Felton making jokes about the investigation and bragging about the overtime he expects to receive from it. He angrily demands Felton be thrown off the case, but G calms him down by explaining that police have to be detached from the victims because they encounter so many. Ellison takes his children back to their hotel room, where his daughter Abby is in denial about her mother's death, and his son Matt angrily refuses to talk to his father. The police arrest a second suspect named Tweety, who was found in possession of the murdered woman's locket. The detectives question Marvin and Tweety separately until Tweety identifies the shooter as 19-year-old Vaughn Perkins. Howard is surprised to learn Vaughn has a mostly clean criminal record, and his family insists Vaughn would never kill anybody. Vaughn is arrested without incident, but Ellison is unable to identify the three suspects because he does not remember their faces. Meanwhile, Ellison sees his wife's body in the morgue and gets upset that her clothes and wedding ring have been removed. Bayless later returns the ring to Ellison, who admits he feels guilty for not protecting his wife or stopping the shooter. Ellison asks to hold Bayless's gun just to know how it feels, and Bayless reluctantly agrees. Howard repeatedly questions Vaughn, believing he is acting as the fall guy for his two friends. Vaughn says nothing, but eventually writes a letter of apology to Ellison. Felton closes the case despite Howard's protests for more time to investigate. Vaughn eventually pleads guilty at his arraignment and insists on serving life without parole. Marvin and Tweety are sentenced to 30 years in prison, but Ellison tells Howard he feels no comfort because his wife is still dead. Howard tries to give Vaughn's letter to Ellison, but he refuses to accept it. Howard eventually speaks directly to Vaughn in prison, where Vaughn admits he handled the gun during the stick-up because he thought if he had the gun, he could control the situation and prevent anyone from getting hurt. Vaughn said he lost control and insists he needs to serve the life sentence to make amends. A devastated Howard finally agrees with Felton's opinion that Vaughn was indeed the shooter. So I have plenty of things of these production note things I could talk about, but I figure you wanted to make comments on the episode first. Right?
Well,
Yeah.
well, it almost goes without saying, but some of the audience might not know. Robin Williams was a pretty good actor.
Yeah.
Gave a very good performance. I like the point that G made that a white person getting shot, not far away from the new stadium, I think, is not good for the reputation of the city. And then saying that he thinks this wouldn't have been a red ball if the victim were black.
Yeah. Well, and he specifically says, from the neighborhood or whatever. So, he's kind of implying that, yeah, it's not only that it's a tourist, but also that it was a white family. So he thinks it'll have more of an impact on white people wanting to come to Baltimore or go to the Camden Yards, which is the stadium they were talking about, where the Baltimore Orioles play.
Now I preferred the previous episode because it wasn't as grim as this one. So it's like, I would say, like, good but grim. But it was very well done, and I like the way that the plot wasn't that it was surprising. It wasn't a case of, oh, the more experienced criminal was putting pressure on the other guy. That he actually did do it. So that was it was unexpected in that way.
Yeah, once again, continuing a theme that we've had recurring already, which is that people's expectations for who would or wouldn't commit murder are often wrong. Is that one of the recurring themes is that, just about anybody driven to the right circumstances could do it. So,
but maybe the guy that actually shot him may have been an SJ.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah, because you've talked about.
There was a moment where Bayless continues to establish himself as an SJ when he tries to connect with the son of the junior high kid, the son of the victim, by talking about how he was hall monitor or schoolyard monitor. So Bayless has always wanted to be an authority, like a good guardian. Follow the rules and enforce the rules. And for anyone who didn't know, that kid was played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who's obviously gone on to become quite famous for other stuff as an adult. So,
yeah, his crying was convincing, even though he turned his head away and was crying against the wall.
And that's his father, Stephen Gyllenhaal, is the director of this episode. So, cast his son in the role, and Robin Williams had previously worked with Barry Levinson on Good Morning Vietnam and Toys, two movies that Levinson directed. So there were a lot of people that speculated that he took this part as a favor to Levinson, but Williams and Fontana both said no, that wasn't true, that he had seen the show already, and then when he was offered the script, he agreed to it right away and was looking forward to it playing. Everybody enjoyed working with him. He and Richard Belzer had actually already known each other, as they had both been stand-up comedians and had been together in stand-up shows before. So they said they did a lot of joking between takes.
But I'm sure, a part of it would have been him doing a favour though, because he would have known that it would have helped Barry Levinson.
Yeah, well, but he basically said it wasn't anything. It was less of a favor. It was more that he knew that the people involved were making something good, including Levinson. That he wouldn't have, he trusted him to be involved with something that was quality. So.
Oh yeah, I mean that's fair enough. But there's still going to be part of it is going to be a favour though. I mean, if you're helping him out.
I mean, and you can continue saying that if you want to, but like I said, he said that wasn't the case. So
Yeah, I know. I'm not saying that he didn't. I'm saying both reasons. It's just that, like, human. Like, if he's his friend, then he's going to be happy to help him out as well.
well, if you're saying that him doing it, fulfilled the same purpose as him doing a favor, then yeah.
I just think I was saying, like, happy to do it and help him out, and like the script as well. Both things can be true.
Yeah, but it was the reverse though. It was like he liked it and wanted to do it, and the
Yeah.
other was sort of a result of it.
Yeah, and he might have thought, hey, I like this show. I don't want it cancelled. And I know the ratings aren't as high as they really should be, so I can help them out.
This episode was the second highest rated episode of Homicide ever. The only one that had more viewers, according to the Nielsen ratings, was the very first episode, Gone for Good, which debuted right after the Super Bowl. So it kind of had a natural audience boost. But this one was the second highest rated ever. And that's why they put it at the beginning of the second season as opposed to at the end of it, to try to boost the ratings. Unfortunately, the rest of that season didn't retain the ratings that the promoted Robin Williams guest starring episode did. But it may have improved the subsequent episodes, and that if they hadn't done that, it's possible that they would have gotten even less viewers than they did. So it did just enough that they ordered a third season. So, but it was right down to the wire in terms of when that decision had to be made. Everybody was pretty much waiting to to find out if the show was going to continue or not, because this ended the original run of the 13 episodes. That was all one production block. So
right, yes.
So it had been,
because the first season was 9. Yeah.
Right. It had been more than a year, since they had done this before it actually aired, because it didn't air until January of '94. So yeah. So a lot of the actors were already taking other guest parts and things, kind of think they maybe have to move on with their life because they weren't sure if this show was going to continue, but thankfully it did.
What?
Were
you going to make a comparison to Blake 7 being 13 episodes, or?
Well, I thought it was for us. I mean, it was interesting that the first 2 seasons of Homicide fit in the same number of episodes as the first one of Blake 7, so it's just a coincidence, I guess. But
yeah, and
well, I guess it's not entirely, because whatever reason that's been a common thing in television, them having like blocks of 13 episodes for some reason. I'm not really sure exactly why that is. I guess because it's a quarter of a year.
Yes, and it's what they really want is they want 52 episodes, because once they get to 52 episodes, then they can have a syndication package.
I thought it was 100 episodes.
Well, what happened on Red Dwarf is they ended up doing because they used to do 6 episodes a series, and then like the final 2 that they did in the 1990s, they made it 8, and then they made it up to 52.
Yeah, well, it may be different in UK, obviously, but I'd always heard here it was like you had to do 100 in order to get syndicated. But so this these notes on production says that the script for BOP GUN was completed before the first season ended, but NBC executive asked for several refinements, including less involved plots and fewer camera movements before approving a second season. In an attempt to appease the network and improve ratings, executive producers Barry Levinson and Tom Fontana sought to make subtle changes to give the show a stronger mainstream appeal while aiming not to compromise its integrity or originality. So the producers slightly toned down the bleak visual style and the handheld photography motif. So you might have noticed that the camera movements kind of were toned down, not quite as jumpy as the first season, and they also employed a new musical director and director of photography to work on the visuals of the show, and they made it a little bit brighter and added more music, more songs within episodes, which will continue to be the case. Whereas the first season there was still music, but there were long stretches of silence without music, and then there was times where the music was very much in the background, and this featured songs kind of actually there being sections of songs as being the main audio you hear in a scene, which hadn't really been done in the first season. So
I forgot that I took some slides, and I'm just not that many, about 20, and then just bring those up.
All right. I think I forgot to say that was so written by David Mills and David Simon, based on a story by Fontana. David Simon is the author of the book that the show was based on, and this was actually the first episode that he had a hand in writing the actual screenplay of the episode, rather than just inspiring it with his book. So that part about apart from the script where Felton and Munch are talking about how people describe muggings and describe the gun or whatever, and they're kind of laughing about that was one of Simon's contributions to the script, because it came directly out as he'd heard the actual homicide cops say. And the quote they have here is talking about when Felton talking about how much overtime he expected to get. Simon said, quote, "That's a conversation that would happen. It happened in any homicide unit in America. And when I saw it actually being acted out, I got a real kick in the pants, because I thought, wherever there are homicide detectives watching this, they're cracking up because they know how true it is."
Right, so yeah, we got proof folks, and looks like Felton's got some gel in his hair. I used to do that in the early 90s, but not by, I think maybe earlier than that, so he's a little bit late with the fashion, I suppose. A couple of years late there, Felton. There we go.
Yeah, it was a fantastic performance by Robin Williams in this episode, and it is the first episode where we really got much of the perspective of the victims or families of the victims. I mean, everything up to this point had been very much in the perspective of the detectives and lieutenant, and we got a little bit more. I mean, there were scenes like this one, where there's nobody from the main cast involved, and I thought that was really good, because I talked about before how this was the episode that really, if I was hooked by 3 Men and Adina, this was the one that got on Homicide, because I thought it did such a fantastic job of balancing the perspectives. And the funny thing is that that can kind of divide the audience a little bit. And watching this with Morgan, because he talks to the TV more than I do, in terms of responding to characters when they say things. And in the scene where Ellison was, getting mad at Felton for laughing and talking about his overtime and stuff, I totally felt for him there. I was right there in Ellison's body.
Yeah.
I took his side in that, and I was right. I would have been just as angry. And I haven't been, thankfully, I hadn't had my family murdered, but I've been in situations similar to that, where I have had that moral indignation of, how can this person treat this like a joke? This is something that affects people and matters to someone, and it doesn't. And how can you expect this person to be able to describe this thing perfectly that he has no experience with? Just because, and I thought it was another great scene where he's looking at the photographs, because he kind of gets that, confrontation with him about, I suppose if it was your wife, you'd memorize what the people look like and stuff. And again, I was totally on his side, despite, liking the characters and the detectives, but I totally related to that. Whereas Morgan responded, he started talking back to Ellison as if he was, he was defending Bo like he's on his side. So that was interesting that the emotions that it, triggered in us as we were watching it, that we basically split opposite sides on that.
And an SFP versus STP thing, because you think that Felton's an STP.
I mean, this episode, there was multiple times in this episode where I started crying because they did such a great job of creating that believable atmosphere, and that every character, even the ones that are only in this episode, the mother and the aunt that just have the short scenes, it's like everybody just is so realistic, and they fit into this dynamic of how the episode plays out. And there's another great example of how Homicide doesn't sugarcoat stuff. It's like everything is portrayed as the reality, the harsh reality of what occurs, even to the, I mean, there's just so many little nice touches, like how the mother was going to, give her son an alibi until Crissetti starts talking about, she'll have to go in front of the grand jury for perjury if they find out she's lying. And she gets out of the car because it's like as soon as it comes down where she's looking out for herself there, then it's all of a sudden she's not going to take the fall for her son anymore.
Right. And that's an example of Robert McKee talking about character in action, where the character has a choice and it tells you something about their character. There, as you said, that she's not going to take the fall for her son.
Yeah. And you have the aunt character who also wasn't going to give him an alibi, wasn't going to lie about it, but she was going to she wanted to believe the best in him, and she makes the comment that we didn't lose his soul, even if he did the crime, good. Because that he did feel remorse for it, and she could tell when he called her. So, and have a case where Howard, she's got a couple different things working in her, because she does have an emotional response, but she's also has her keen detective instincts, which are trying to logically work out why Vaughn would take the fall for this when she doesn't think he was capable of doing it.
Right, and also in a previous episode, Felton had said that he doesn't care about motive; he cares about how.
Right. And so I thought, again, that was a great contrast where he says, if you want to do, pursue this, go ahead, but I'm on to the next dead guy.
Yeah, so I think it's a good episode for showing Felton's an STP.
Yeah.
And I liked how you were talking about that scene where Robin Williams' character got upset about the joking, but then G takes him to one side and explains why.
Yeah,
that's the case with Felton.
And I sound redundant saying another great scene, because I thought all the scenes were great, but yeah, I mean, that's another thing that it comes out G's character again, that he follows the rules and keeps the morale up of his detectives, or tries to, so a complaint from the victim's family, he's not going to turn around and take Felton off the case, because he believes in two things. One, he believes in what he says, that Felton can close the case, but two, that he wouldn't do that to one of his detectives anyway, to undercut them or hurt their confidence in trying to do something. So he wants to keep everything in perspective, and he once again, as he usually does, can pull out a story from back in the old days and talks about his first case as a detective himself. Even
I like that though.
Yeah, and it's good. And he says everybody remembers their first, but we don't remember our 40th or our 50th.
Yeah.
And he said, that's true of all of us, but Felton, the only difference in Felton is he doesn't have the patience to hide that. So, well, some of them might have been a little bit more sensitive to him. He's saying so actually what it is that's bothering you about Felton is actually why you should be confident that he's going to solve the case, because he's not distracted by anything else.
Now, when they said this usually it's as you say, you have like someone in their early 20s playing a teenager. In this example, when they said he was like 23, I thought, wait a minute, he looks a lot younger than 23. Like it was the other way around.
Can work both ways.
That was a good look on his face. I wonder if he went on to star in a sitcom, this guy.
No, the production notes mentioned that he was a Washington D.C. native, and that he had done like theater and stuff there, but it didn't say much about what he went on to do after that.
There's the look of a hardened criminal.
Yeah, so he's another believable character. You know, he's confident in what he did and didn't do because he knows he has a big enough rap sheet to know how this goes. You know, he's like, I'm a stick-up man. That's what I do. I've never fired, at anybody doing this because I know he defends his skill at being a stick-up man. So like
Yes.
That's basically like he's saying to the cops, like, I'm not sloppy enough that I would shoot somebody while I'm trying to rob them.
Yep. Because for him, it's a business.
Right. He even says, I know my business.
This was just after Lewis said a funny line. Maybe he said something like, "Oh, I guess he had it coming to him, huh?" Something like that.
Because the one guy that he did shoot earlier, didn't kill but shot, was over a record album, Eddie Hazel. There's another reference to Parliament Funkadelic because Eddie Hazel was in that group. So.
Yeah. And he said something like, "Oh,
like, as a collector's item."
Yes, yes, that was good. So I think he has very good comedic delivery. This guy.
Yep, Clark Johnson. He will go on to to direct some episodes of Homicide later on.
And then, this is towards the end, I think.
Yeah, I liked that effect where they had the reflection of the two, like when they showed one of Howard or Perkins, you could see the reflection of the other through the glass.
Yeah, directors love that. Reflections of things. Right, so have you got any more notes?
Yes.
Very good.
And I won't read all of them, don't worry, but a lot of it is a lot of gushing from the critics that happened from this episode, as it was very well received in one of the top episodes of the show. And like I already said, it had the best ratings of any episode besides the very first one. So some of the review comments, Baltimore Sun said Gyllenhaal's direction was as good as anything he had done in film and called the script one of the most ambitious scripts you'll see on TV this year. Chicago Sun-Times gave the episode its highest rating of 4 stars and called Robin Williams' portrayal a piercing, dramatic performance. Gronke also said, in 1 hour, BOP GUN says more about firearms, urban tragedies, crime victims, and racial politics than any yammering congressman trying to blame television for our violent society. And Entertainment Weekly critic Ken Tucker, the brilliantly jagged murder investigation scenes and the exceptional performances from Homicide Detective co-stars Daniel Baldwin and Melissa Leo. That's Felton and Howard. Tribune Company television critic Kate O'Hare praised BOP GUN for focusing on characterization and dialogue rather than action. Instead of the episode with a mix of intense emotion, dogged police work, and humorous banter among the detectives, BOP GUN typifies the philosophy of homicide. Grueling episode. Williams performed probably his finest non-comedic performance ever.
Ooh. Mind you, they said that at the time before he did other things.
Well, true, right. This was, 94, so. But he had already done, Good Morning Vietnam.
Yeah, I thought it was very good in Good Morning Vietnam.
Yeah, it was. Visual art of the camera, realistic yet nearly literary dialogue. Benjamin Morrison praised the unexpectedly understated performance of Williams and praised the episode for not being simple or formulaic. He suggested viewers who were crime victims themselves would be particularly moved by the script. And there's, especially that scene where, I'm saying all the scenes are great, but probably to me the best in the whole episode is the scene at the courthouse where Robin Williams, where he's talking about members of the club, basically families of crime victims, and he says you can spot other club members. And I thought that was a really good
and
point.
And it's a club that we don't want to be a member of.
Yeah. And then after another fantastic thing earlier in the episode when the press is trying to kind of descend on when they're trying to get out of the place, and the one media guy asks him, "How do you feel?" And he just says, "What?" And he barely even gets the word out. Like, how can you possibly ask me that? And that was just perfect to me. Like, they're saying, like, he could have, they could have had him like yell something or try to punch the camera guy, or but it was just perfect to have him just just be so flabbergasted that this guy would ask him, "How do you feel?" that he can't even do anything like that. He's just like, how, it was just fantastic. And I don't know if the script was written exactly like that or whether that was acting or directing choice as they were doing it, but either way, it was just spot on, terrific. So anyway, yeah, there's a lot of stuff on that. Not everybody was completely complimentary. It says a few said it was too bleak, or the show. One person said the show made itself a target for charges of racism by making the three murderers black. But of course, as has been pointed out, in Baltimore's majority black, so it's not surprising that in that situation there would have been ones committing the crime. But
yeah, I mean, some shows they'll have like an ethnically diverse gang,
right?
That doesn't reflect reality.
Had already before that episode and would later have plenty of white criminals portrayed, so it's not attempting to make any political statements about that. But and then Tom Shales basically said that the episode suffered because there wasn't enough Andre Braugher in it. He only had a few lines, which that to me is actually the reason why I can say that this is my favorite episode of the show. If I just have to pick one, this is it. And part of it is because I can be confident that that the episode, it's not just because there was a great Andre Braugher performance. So I know that sounds weird maybe, but his performances are almost without fail really good. And to see an episode that he really wasn't featured that much in that was able to be this good, it was kind of, like I said, it was the episode that really convinced me this show is worth watching, because it's not just, there's that one guy that stands out. It once again reinforced how good of a cast they had, and how no matter who was getting the screen time, that it was going to be a great performance. It was going to be worth watching. And yeah, actually this, was the first episode that really featured a case where Felton was the primary as being the main plot going on in the episode. So that was good to see.
And what little Frank Pemberton had, when he got the bullets and he said 45s or something like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Look what I found, Marvin. Yeah. So everybody got a little bit to do in this. And again, just the little touches when they're talking about, they're interviewing the aunt, and she's talking about, her brother's murder, and everyone, in Cressetti and Pemberton kind of looking back and asking each other, do you remember the Perkins case? And again, they can't remember it. And again, it kind of goes back to what G said about that they handle so many of these that they're not going to have a personal stake in this,
Yeah. And they wouldn't want to remember them either.
Right.
Because it would just build up emotionally.
So, I thought that again was a great touch. The fact that it rather than a cliche, which would have been, oh yeah, one of the detectives remembered that case and had stuff to say about it. And as much as I liked the show NYPD Blue, I can even immediately see a contrast that they probably would have had that be the case. They would have had the detective, oh yeah, I remember the Perkins case, that this and this happened. And instead, they have the much more realistic, Cressetti and Pimbleton look at each other like, no, you remember it? No. I don't think that was my case. I don't know, but they're not able to, like, the two of them and Howard, like, none of them remembered it. So it kind of added to that feeling of, from the family's perspective, thinking, you know,
I mean,
this family tragedy was basically forgotten.
I mean, people have talked about someone's talked about that somebody who could be a very good counsellor, say working with children. It's just that they would be good at it, but they wouldn't want to like take the cases home with them, and that they would keep building up and building up because they wouldn't able to forget a situation.
Right.
If they remembered everything they saw, then it would just like build up and build up for them. So they have to have that ability to move on.
BOP GUN won a Writers Guild of America award for Best Screenplay of an Episodic Drama, and Robin Williams received an Emmy Award nomination for Guest Actor in a Drama Series. He didn't win. He lost to somebody who was on Picket Fences. But anyway, that was actually the first acting Emmy nomination for the show. It would be a few more years before any of the actual main cast would get an Emmy nomination.
Yeah, that shows us a little bit of industry politics involved in terms of, not in terms of politics, but in terms of like the ratings the show will get. Where it's like, oh, now they're getting higher ratings. Now we can nominate them for awards, even though they were probably acting just as well a few years earlier.
Right. And that's what, since it isn't to do with the actual plot of the show, I can give something that's sort of a spoiler in a sense, is that Andre Braugher would eventually get an Emmy Award for Homicide, but it wasn't until the 6th season. So it was sort of like almost an achievement award at that point for, like, he's been good this long, and so now we're going to finally give him the award. So
and they'll say if they say, aren't you a bit like, oh, it's for a body of work.
Yeah. Well, right, because with those award shows, they kind of, sometimes it's like, well, it was this person's turn, basically, and that's kind of, I guess, what it was. So he wasn't nominated until season 5, and then finally won it in season 6.
Yeah, and it's like, well, we've got a backlog. We've got other people to award first.
Right.
That's
well, and that's the sad thing, is that a lot of the time they'll kind of pick somebody and give them the award over and over again, rather than doing, so it's like, and you could say, okay, well, if somebody deserved it, but it seems like they'll zero in on a few people and then just keep getting the award instead of, I'm not saying that they should spread it around, like Obama said, spread the wealth around or whatever, but it seems like they'll sometimes forget about some people because they want to gush over one person too much. Like, and John Larroquette, who kept winning for Night Court, it's like, yeah, John Larroquette's a great actor and he did a good job on Night Court, but even he, like, after he'd won it like 4 times or something, he took his name out of contention for it because he said, it's time for somebody else to get this. I don't deserve it every year.
And that was a smart move by his part, because he wouldn't want people getting jealous.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it kind of works both ways, because he comes off looking like he's being gracious and saying, look, I don't, have to keep winning this, but on the same token, he can leave that sort of perception that if he hadn't done that, he probably would have won it again. So there's kind of like an asterisk on it, like, well, he might have gotten it again anyway, but he took his name out of contention. So.
How does that work? Because we hear about how the Oscars work and like who the voters are, and they say, oh, they're a load of old people. Who does the voting for the Emmys?
It's basically done the same way, and it's just the Television Academy instead of the Motion Picture one. So it's whoever the dues-paying members of the Academy are, and you don't have to be a member to win an award, but you do have to be to vote.
Right.
But you know, they as far as the acting though, I think they either submit their own stuff or the show submits it. Somebody has to submit a recording basically to be considered. So there's plenty of actors over the years in both television and movies that have never been nominated because they never submitted any of their stuff because they didn't care about it.
And also there is a tendency that the good acting, I mean a lot of the good acting in Homicide: Life in the Street might have been on less popular episodes.
Yeah, that's, sometimes the case. Well, if you went by the ratings, you could argue that, the huge majority of the episodes were less popular episodes because it became, it was kind of, it had a devoted following, but there wasn't a lot of mainstream appeal, I guess, to it. Or it wasn't one that was, this was, like I said, the second highest rated ever, and I don't remember exactly the total number of episodes over the course of the series that were in the top 10 most watched for the week, but it was a pretty small number. And off the top of my head, I only know of this one and the debut right after the Super Bowl as being that were in the top 10 episodes of the week as far as viewers of TV shows. For the week.
I think in this,
magazines like TV Guide and Entertainment Weekly, in their regular television stuff would have that little chart that showed what the top 10 most viewed shows were of the previous week.
When did Robin Williams get into the phase of doing a lot of children's films because he wanted to do films for his kids?
I don't know. Mrs. Doubtfire was around the same time, as early 90s. And then he did Hook around the same time too. And Jumanji was a little bit later in the decades.
I've not seen any of those films. I've seen Good Will Hunting though.
A while before I saw Jumanji though. I didn't see it when it was new. I didn't see it until several years later on television. But I did see Hook and Mrs. Doubtfire in the theater when they first came out. So yeah, I was a fan of Robin Williams from an early age because I watched Happy Days and then Mork and Mindy, so I saw him on those, and I saw some of his stand-up stuff, and saw him on Comic Relief on HBO. The comedy thing that they did for raising money for homeless or whatever, with him and Billy Crystal and Whoopi Goldberg. So
I don't know.
I
don't know how. Yeah.
I think that might have been where he met Richard Belzer, was through Comic Relief, but they were both stand-ups, obviously.
Did that have anything to do with the UK Comic Relief, which started in about 1988? And they had Red Nose Day.
Probably. The one here started earlier than that, but it was like mid-'80s, I think maybe 84, 85, somewhere in there.
Right, okay. Right.
But yeah, those were fun to watch because they would have a big group of comedians that would all do a set. So, obviously as a kid I was more interested in seeing all the comedians than I was any of the the actual charitable cause stuff that they would talk about. But here comes the boring part.
When Mork did appear in Happy Days, that Mork and Mindy was a spin-off from Happy Days, folks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Was it left unclear as to how much it was of Rich's dream?
Yeah, they made it kind of like that typical sitcomish thing of like where they'd have like one little thing happen in the non-dream thing where you're left to be, sort of think, oh, maybe it wasn't a dream kind of thing. There's a lot of sitcoms that do stuff like that.
Yeah.
They even did that on Night Court, with the aforementioned Night Court. They ended in the very last episode by looking like Bull was being taken away by aliens.
I think that actually happened in an episode of Dynasty. I think one of them got abducted by aliens. Fallon, I think. But we digress.
Yeah, but yeah, so much good. I could gush for hours about this episode, but I won't. But all is well that ends well. And my son has arrived at home, so all is right with the world.
Yes.
So yeah, this will come as a super shock to the audience, but I give this episode a 10 out of 10. So what do you think, Ben?
Oh yes.
No pressure.
I'll give it a 9 out of 10. I'll take a point off for it being grim.
That's cool. So obviously, liked it a lot too. So,
but I wouldn't want every episode to be like this because it was a bit grim.
Well, yeah, I
usually
wouldn't
like
either. And it's too much. Kind of what I said before about like SVU about being tough to watch. Like if every episode were as emotionally roller coastering, that's not really a verb, but anyway, this episode was. Then yeah, I would have gotten kind of worn out by it. But but yeah, I mean, there's so much about this one just made an impact on me at the time, and just made this. And of course, had to wait. There were 3 more episodes in that sort of abbreviated second season, but then we had to wait like all the way till the fall before our new season. So I have no idea at the time, how much I was thinking about it, because obviously I was still in high school at that time. So in fact, I graduated in '94, so that I was kind of preoccupied with some stuff around that time.
So was this? Right, so this is the 4th episode, but they broadcast it first in order to get a big debut for the season. Right.
So yeah, that entire season aired January of '94 because there's only 4 episodes, so it was basically the 4 weeks of January.
So do you forgive the network for broadcasting this one first?
Well, yeah, because this episode was self-contained to the point where if you look, since now you've seen the other episodes of the second season, there wasn't anything specifically from this episode that referred to any of those other ones, so it didn't really matter too much as far as the narrative of the story. The only times I really thought it was, a problem is when it messes with the story, which is why when we get into the 3rd season, it's so important for me to make sure you watch the right episode, because that was a much bigger screw up that I don't forgive them for. But thankfully, since when I showed Homicide to Morgan, I was able to show him, the right order on the DVD, then he didn't have stuff all messed up for him that way.
Right.
So that's it's the end of season 2, everybody, and the next Homicide video we'll do will be the first episode of season 3.
Right. So that's goodbye from me.
Goodbye. Thanks for watching.